Hello, friends. Welcome to the virtual Kelly Writer's House. Happy Groundhog Day. Happy Snow Day. That's not really a snow day. I hope everybody's doing as well as possible. My name is Jamie-Lee Josselyn, and I teach a class for Penn's creative writing program called Sports Narratives, which is relevant today. And I'm so glad you're here. And I'm especially glad that we are joined today by Mirin Fader of The Ringer. Hi, Mirin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm living in a pandemic on a snow day that happens to be Groundhog Day. So and you are not on a snow day. You are far away from snow.
I'm not even going to talk about the weather right now. I realize that I'm very privileged in my weather. So
Yes, but I got to take photos of my dog with snowmen this morning. So, yeah, there is that. So we are so glad to have you with us today. And we were just saying before we went live that even though we, of course, wish we were sitting cozily in the Kelly Writer's House right now, we are glad that we didn't have to navigate, airline travel during a big snowstorm and whatnot. Also, Mirin is on book deadline, so that would perhaps be a bit of a stressful thing. For everybody watching, I imagine many of you are familiar with Mirin's work, but in addition to being a pretty new staffer at The Ringer, she has worked for Bleacher Report. She has written for ESPNW and ESPN.com. She worked at the Orange County Register for a while, and her book, which is coming out in August, is called Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP. And we will talk about that in a little while. And I just want to say before we get going, to give you all a little bit of a rundown of just how it's going to go over the next hour and 10 minutes or so. In a minute, we're going to have Mirin read a little bit of a piece she wrote about Tyler Skaggs fairly recently. And then we'll kind of go back and forth with some questions for a little bit. And eventually, I will very happily pose some of your questions for Mirin. So those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see that there's a YouTube chat to the right of the screen. So feel free at any point to put some questions in there, and hopefully we'll be able to get to as many as possible. So that's the plan. Mirin, I was thinking as I was getting ready for this moment, the first piece of yours that I think I read was your profile on Mo'ne Davis in 2017. Which, speaking of Philadelphia, right? Was that maybe the last time you were in Philadelphia for that piece?
Yes, it was. Actually, maybe I was there one time after that. I have some family
Okay.
in the area, but man, that was so long ago. I know it's only a couple of years, but yeah, that was the first time I was like old enough to drive a rental car, and that was that was the first time I drove and like traveled for a story. I was like, you're gonna pay for me to report in another city? Like, how is this? How?
And props to you driving your first work paid for rental car in Philadelphia. That's no small feat. Especially if you had to park. We could spend the next hour talking about parking in Philadelphia. We'll do a different event on that. But it's funny, actually. I remember my first work trip, and it was to LA, and I was also terrified about driving a rental car in LA. So it appears, friends. Oh, you're back. We had a little Zoom glitch for a second.
Hey, I don't know if you froze. Okay, I'm here.
Okay, good. That's all right. Yeah. So anyway, you were here in 2017 for the Mo'ne Davis profile, and that was for Bleacher Report. And I recently listened. You were very recently on the long form podcast, which everybody should go and listen to. And you mentioned there that that piece was kind of like a big moment for you with Bleacher Report. Was that the piece that led to you being hired full time there?
No, so I was at the Orange County Register, like you mentioned before
Yes.
that, and we had layoffs. And so I was looking for my next gig, and, Bleacher had approached me while I was at the Register, and they said, why don't you go to Philly and do this story? It'll kind of be like your tryout. And so
Yeah.
I went, and it was such a wonderful experience, but I did not get hired after that. So, but that was the point where it was like, now I had a relationship with these editors, and they trusted me to go do a story so I could pitch to them. And so it started pretty much a year and a half, I guess, relationship with them, pitching and writing. And then when I did need that full-time job, like I said, that's when I went to Lithuania. They were so kind to send me, and then I got hired. So,
Okay.
I always tell I always tell young students, like, freelancing is kind of the key. I know everyone's so focused on internships, but if you can prove that you can deliver a story for a professional newsroom, like, that's going to get you closer in the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just so everybody is on the same page, can you just go through maybe the sort of overview timeline of your career, trajectory from graduating college in, was it 2013 that you graduated?
Yeah. Yeah. So I graduated in 2013 from Occidental College, and I applied to over 50 places upon graduation. So kind of in that like 6-month build up to it. And I heard back from like no one, or, I just got like a no or a no response. And then finally, the Register was like the only reply that I got. So I just kept following up and following up. And they said, come in for an interview. So I started there. So I was there 2013 to 2017. And I did pretty much all the grunt work, like community sports, little league, high school, junior college, and then the local universities there. I started freelancing during that time for ESPN and Bleacher Report. But I wasn't getting hired by either of those, and I wasn't moving up at the Register as well. And then, like I mentioned, we had layoffs, and so I became a full-time freelancer, like half Bleacher Report, half ESPN. And then Bleacher sent me to Lithuania, and that is when I did the LaMelo Ball story. And then they hired me after that. And then I was there for the last 3 years. And then I just started at the Ringer in December of 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. And here you are. And at some point there was a book proposal and a
Yes.
book, just that small thing that's happening now as well. Well, that is helpful. And, obviously, on our side of the world at the Writers House at Penn, with the creative writing program, we work with a lot of students who are thinking about going into journalism, going into writing. And there's a lot of conversation about, freelancing versus internships, full-time jobs versus pitching for a number of places, how to pay the rent, et cetera, et cetera. And also what kind of writing do you want to do? And, and how can you balance maybe the kind of writing that will afford the rent versus the kind of writing that like either gets you out of bed in the morning or keeps you from going to bed at night because you're so excited about it. And for you, you've always, it seems, been drawn to, these long profiles, these features, which you've really, and thank goodness, because you're so good at them, but you've really been committed to that. And I wonder, maybe even early on, were there moments where you thought maybe you would have to pivot to a different kind of writing in order to make it work?
Yeah, it was definitely not a popular thing when I said I wanted to do features. I think at that point, everyone was very much like doing gamers. You know, gamers were still a thing. 20, so in college, like 2011, 2012, 2013. And so I was actually an intern for ABC Sports, and we just had to sit there and like log baseball games and like say what happened. I just remember like being alone, you know, just in the studio, just being like so bored. Like, not that I didn't like watching it. I just like, I was like, where's the story? Where's the tension? Where's the narrative arc, you know? And so it was never something that people were like, oh yeah, you should totally do features. I think a lot of people were telling me to be as open as possible. And so in a way, I did pivot in the sense of I did do those gamers. I did do those stories that I didn't enjoy. I did do the video stuff, but I always knew that I wanted to do features. And so you have to market yourself for what you want to be. Instead of saying like, I aspire to do features, you know, take aspiring out of your vocabulary. Just say, I am a features writer. And, you know, that's like, okay, you're 19 years old, you're a features writer, but it's like, yes, you have to walk in the room like that so that when there is a feature, people say, oh, she wants to do features. I'm going to give that story to her. And then, you know, I think at that point, like, I thought, okay, I'm going to do every sport, so that'll make me more hireable. I think now there's been such a shift. People are coming out of college, like, I only cover the NBA, I only cover football. And it's like, I don't know. I think the best way to be able to do the kind of work that you want to do is like be open to doing everything, but like don't lose sight of your goal.
Yeah. I love what you said about taking the word aspiring out. Because aren't we all aspiring? Like, like
Yeah,
always, you know, like
exactly.
hopefully everybody continues to aspire to something. I don't know, maybe I got too philosophical too early, but but
It's true.
yeah, I think that that makes a lot of sense. We see that a lot at the writer's house with students saying, well, I want to be a writer, or I'm not a writer yet. And I like running a lot. And there are people who are maybe training for their first 5K and they won't say that they're a runner, you know,
Right.
like, but it's like, come on, you're doing the thing. Did you go and do the thing? You're doing the thing. You're a runner, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, it's especially for women, like we hesitate to say, I am this. Like we're always hesitant to like occupy space.
Right.
But they're already doubting us when we walk in the door. So you might as well like try to like act as if, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, in a minute, we'll have you read from the Tyler Skaggs piece, but who were a couple writers maybe who you know, who were models for you, or who are maybe even still people you sort of look to in your career?
Yeah, I was and am still obsessed with Wright Thompson, Gary Smith. And then like, as you can see with our bookshelves, I'm a nerd. So to non-sports people, like Toni Morrison was just everything to me. Like I remember reading Toni Morrison and just everything changed for me. Like the way I thought about language, the way I thought about writing, and you know, you could insert rhythm into your sentences. So I was like very, very moved by Toni Morrison. And then Jeff Pearlman was somebody that I was very like, I just wanted his life. Like I saw that he did 8 books, and I was just like, oh my God, and you can afford to live in Orange County. Like I want your life. And so I just reached out to him, and he became like a mentor to me. And so you know, you mentioned my book, like that was always the model for me. It's like, okay, I do want to be a magazine writer, but I want to write multiple books. And so yeah, that was always kind of like in the, you know,
Yeah.
the lofty goal, the aspirations that you have for yourself.
Absolutely. Um, I said this on Twitter at some point in the last few days, but I likened you to Joan Didion, which is you know,
I,
let's just giggle about that.
yeah,
But
not even a thing, but to
yeah,
even, yeah, that's very cool. Thank you.
yes, and you know, I mean it, and maybe I'll say more later about why I mean it. But then I also learned I think on the long form podcast that you are 5'0" tall. So now you're even more like Joan Didion. Um, and I am 5'1" tall. So we should all just hang out at some point.
We have a
Um,
support group, please. Like,
yes, yes. Um, but I was also, I think when I was, rereading a bunch of these pieces over the weekend, I was also thinking about an essay that we read in my sports narratives class by Roger Angel that is called "Gone for Good," which is about the pitcher Steve Blass, and the reason I was thinking of that piece is it's so clear in that piece. That Roger Angel, he's just taking his time getting the story. He's just hanging around. He's going to the pizza place with Steve Blass. He's hanging out with the family. He's not just there to get, the sexy story. He's really putting in the work, which is something I see in your work. And then when I've heard you talk about your work, that seems to be really important to you, not rushing it, not rushing either the writing or the relationships end of it, you know.
I mean, you just can't microwave good journalism. Like, I think it's hard when, I think there's such a lack of understanding of what these stories take, if you, especially when you talk about sensitive things, like if I were to profile you, I wouldn't I wouldn't expect that you would tell me your deepest, darkest secrets on the first coffee, like 20 minutes in, and just like if you were profiling me, that would be so weird if you were asking me about my trauma 20 minutes in, And so I think you just have to have that approach with your features, which is like, feature writing is getting to know someone. Feature writing is showing up 4 hours early. Like, feature writing is noticing details that other people think aren't important. Like, your notebook is like, it should be filled with observations when you're done reporting. And even if a sliver of them make the piece, you just are inhabiting a new world and you are the expert of that world. And I think like that is how you get the story, because it's sure, there's fact checking, there's a lot of fact checking, but you can't fact check interpretation, in a sense. Like, you are doing very difficult work of observation and synthesizing, and it's hard, but it's so rewarding. Like, people are interesting, they just happen to play sports.
Yeah. On the long form podcast, you said, how do you get to someone's soul in 10 minutes? Which is exactly like, what we're talking about. You can't. So you need to figure out how are you going to, get yourself the access. And one of the things we talk about in class or in independent studies that I do is this idea of how much material you're going to have that doesn't necessarily make it to the page in order to get the material that you can shape on the page, and what material won't be on the page but will support, whatever story you're getting at.
I think just being curious about, what you think is important and not. Sometimes you'll leave an interview, you'll be like, oh my God, this scene is totally the kicker. And then, you'll find when you're doing the draft, it didn't even make the final cut. So it's just always being open to surprise, and like what you think is the story might actually not be the story.
Yeah. Well, speaking of stories, why don't we hear one of yours? So will you will you read us a little bit from the piece?
Yes. Okay, so I was gonna read the lead from the Tyler Skaggs story. It's a really sad story, but I really hope that grief would not be the central theme that it went through. Even though this lead is obviously very filled with people grieving, I wanted to humanize Tyler and show who he was as a person. Okay, so here's the lead. A small teddy bear, tan-colored and smiling, sits on the couch. It's wearing a gray Minnesota Vikings hooded sweatshirt, 2 holes up top for its round ears to pop out. Tyler Skaggs loved the Vikings. Debbie Skaggs, Tyler's mother, and Carly Skaggs, Tyler's wife, sit on a beige couch in Carly's parents' home, staring at the bear. It's adorable. Big brown nose, little dotted eyes, cuddly. Carly squeezes the bear's right paw, and it plays a voicemail from Tyler when the left-handed pitcher was on the road with the Los Angeles Angels in 2015. Hey, I'm just calling to talk to you. I miss you, babe. I love you, babe. I miss you. Call me when you can. Hope you're not asleep. Miss you. Bye. Carly lets a tear fall. The sound of Tyler's sweet, upbeat voice is too much. He said, I miss you 3 times, she manages through a mask on this late July afternoon in Santa Monica, California. She doesn't press the paw often because it's difficult to listen to, difficult to consider the illusion that he is still here, that July 1st, 2019 didn't happen, that Tyler wasn't found dead in the Hilton Dallas South Lake Town Square Hotel just before the Angels were set to play the Texas Rangers. An autopsy report later revealed that he had died of a drug overdose, having fentanyl, oxycodone, and alcohol in his system at the time. The death was determined to be accidental, as the official cause of his death was intoxication from the substances, along with terminal aspiration of gastric contents, which means that he choked on his own vomit. He was 27. Numb, Carly says, remembering how she was stricken by the moment. I felt like I had died. No, reliving that day is too much. She turns her memory instead to how whenever she and Tyler ate at restaurants, especially their favorite, Benihana, he'd reach over the table for her hand. They'd hold hands until the food came. She thinks of how kind, how funny he was, how he'd start dancing, bopping to an invisible jam, wherever they were. This happens often, the needing to rescue herself from reliving the worst. Every time she takes a walk, turning each corner, she imagines him there. Then she's betrayed by the inevitable emptiness, the cool air lapping at her ankles as she walks home alone. She can't allow herself to keep thinking, to go there, that dark place. So she loses herself in Tyler's voice, in the teddy bear. It reminds her of the dad Tyler wanted badly to be. He loves kids and wanted to have his own soon, so they could see him play, so they could hang out in the Angels clubhouse with him. Carly smiles, caressing Tyler's gold wedding ring, which she wears on a gold chain around her neck. She thinks of her 2.5-year-old niece, who often spends the night. Her niece loves the bear. My teddy bear, she screams, twirling, hugging the bear tightly, pressing the paw over and over and over every morning. Hey, I'm just calling to talk to you. I miss you, babe. Uncle, the niece screams. Uncle, uncle, uncle.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, of course, that story, it's a tough story. It's a sad story. Um, but as you said, as you were getting ready to read, you didn't want that story to only be about grief. And a line that stood out to me in that story is, he is so much more than what happened. And we can see even just in that short part that you began with, you're already getting at that. You're already getting at, he's more than the way he died. And I think what also comes up for me with that is, even though that line was very specifically written with regard to how Tyler died, I think it also, that sentiment of somebody being so much more than one particular thing, I've noticed that comes up when we write and talk about athletes anyway, especially elite athletes, because we often reduce them to, one specific thing, whether it's, in this case, this tragedy, or something like a professional athletic career. So that was something I kept thinking of as I was reading even more of your stories, this idea of you kind of taking the thing, whatever it is, and going beyond it. And a question for you, actually, one of our students, Jayla, asked this in the YouTube chat, but I think it's very applicable here. Is she was wondering, with feature writing, what is the relationship building process like? What is the preparation like? And certainly with this piece where you were speaking with both Skaggs's wife, Carly, and his mom, Debbie, what was it like specifically there?
Yeah, I mean, it took time. It took about 9 months to get, access to them and have them feel like comfortable and, ready to talk. I think the relationship, especially when you're trying to get to know people, is to just understand that you know, even though they've agreed to an interview with you, you still don't have like a right to their trauma. You know, you're a stranger, they're a stranger. You're meeting in this awkwardly intimate moment. They know why you're there. They know you're asking about their dead son. They know it's going to come up, but you need to remember that if you're a human and a person, there are ways to honor someone and talk about someone and not just go straight for like, so did you know he was using drugs? You know, that's just, it's not right. And I think like you have to have a strong like moral compass. And you'll see as a reporter, as you do more tough stories, that these things are very instinctual. You will just kind of know when to ask a question and when to not ask a question. And so like I got to their house and Carly started crying even before the interview started. So you already know like this is really difficult for them. Like they are trying their hardest to sit there and be vulnerable with you. And so you have to just tread very lightly. And so, you know, you start out by asking questions about the person, not necessarily what happened. Because at the end of the day, like what happened is secondary to who he was. Because no matter how many times they know what happened or didn't know what happened, he's still gone. And so, you know, you want to ask about like, who was he kind? Was he nurturing? Who was he? What was he like? Where did he like to go? What did he like to do? You know, and Shonda Rhimes always says that your first like couple pages of a script should give as much detail as possible about the character of a person. So I always think of the lead just like that. Like in this lead alone, we know that Tyler was very affectionate, very vulnerable, very nurturing, very kind, expressive. We know that he was not just like that with him, but with the niece. You know, there's all these things that you're learning about him. And so you're trying to learn as much about someone and then present it in an interesting way for the reader.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think your curiosity and your interest there is going to kind of play out and feed off the people you're talking with. So in this case, his wife and his mom, and it's only going to build from there. And I think you also have to recognize, especially in a situation like this, where it was so long before you even had access, it might not work out. They might decide to say, actually, this is too much, and you have to. That's sort of the risk you take with this kind of material.
I always joke that like I have like a book on my plate of lost stories, because man, the lost archives, the lost stories, there's so many things that we attempt that don't come through. And a lot of it is because the subject is like, actually, I thought I could do this, but I can't. And you don't want to be that person that's like, no, you agreed anyway. It's like, no, like this really sucks for them, and you don't want to add to their pain.
Right. Absolutely. And, sort of course, connected to this, I can't help but think about the work you've done on Gianna Bryant, and Kobe, but I purposely say Gianna first because that's really who you've primarily written about. And you've published two pieces on Gianna. The first was in Bleacher Report about a month after their deaths, I think, last year, and it was called The Legacy of Mamacita. And then just a week ago, The Ringer published a piece about their legacy that focuses specifically on Gianna's team and her teammates. And so I'm wondering, with that piece, and with both of them, how did it come to be that was the focus and the angle you decided to take?
I mean, I felt like when Kobe died, and I was consuming everything, reading everything, even though it was painful, I wanted to be very like aware of what was happening in this moment and how it was being talked about. I think there's always this rush to be first. And maybe I'm just privileged to not have to do that, which I feel very lucky. but I never wanted to be first. I wanted to read everything and then figure out what, like, where is the gap here? And everything I was reading was just like, she was just like a footnote in Kobe's story. I was like extremely bothered by this. It was like, Gigi loved UConn. She wanted to go to the WNBA. She loved basketball, and Kobe mentored her, end of story. And like, you know, it really upset me. It upset me because she was a human being that had her own narrative. And there's something really pure about loving basketball as a 12, 13-year-old girl. And, you know, for me, I was like that too. And I grew up in the same, you know, area as her. And like, I played in the same tournaments. Like, the people that coached me coached her. Like, there's just very interesting connections, and like the girls basketball community in Southern California is so extensive. And I was just like, I want to know more about her. And I don't just want to know, like, was she legit good at basketball? I wanted to know, like, is she somebody that I would have wanted to have a sleepover with when I was 12? You know, would I be friends with her? What does she like to eat? You know, and so my goal was like, I want to honor her spirit, right? And that is like a pretty daunting thing to want to do. And my editor was like, are you sure that you want to do this? And I was very sure. I just kind of kept coming back to her and seeing her. And, you know, if we look at like the Tyler Skaggs story, that was like a year after they had been processing. And that's usually the timeline for stories like this. It's always a look back. This was talking to people in the midst of their grief. And like I said, I didn't want to be first, but I did need to put out the story within a month before the memorial. And so I would just pick up the phone and people would just start crying. You know, it's very, very hard to process the loss of a young person. The loss of any person is just tragic, but the loss of a young person is even more so. So it took reaching out to like 60 people, and I ended up getting 30 to try to like paint the clearest picture possible.
Yeah. And both in that piece from a year ago and the one that you published just last week with The Ringer, you know, you speak with a number of her teammates. And, you know, in thinking generally about this idea of both having the establishing patience and establishing trust with people, in a number of your stories, the trust that you're establishing is with very young people, whether we're talking about Gianna's teammates and friends, or you know, in the Monet Davis piece, also, you know, LaMelo was just a young lad when you first started working with him. Yeah. And so it strikes me as well that not only do you write these stories that depends on this kind of patience and trust, but you know, you kind of up the degree of difficulty, I would say, because it's not just that you're establishing it with these really young people, which any of us know that that's its own, you know, challenge, but also you have to establish it with their families as well, with their parents.
Right. I think the most interesting time to profile someone is at the beginning of the career or at the end.
Mhm.
Um, I think the middle is just like, they're not really, you're kind of, it's just not as interesting. At the beginning, you know, they're very unfiltered. They're very excited. They're very green. It's so easy to get wrapped up in their passion. And, you know, I have a friend that wants to be a YA novelist, a young adult fiction novelist. And, you know, becoming her friend really opened up my world to young adult fiction, and how it's not really, you know, I think a couple years ago, it wasn't taken as seriously as it is now, but I always felt that in the same way that wasn't taken as seriously, I felt like young athletes weren't taken as seriously. People just thought, well, you don't have much to say, you're a high schooler. And if you read YA and if you talk to young people, they are incredibly complex. They are dealing with enormous issues, incredibly thoughtful. And I think they open up because you're treating them like an adult. You're treating them like they have something to say, that their message is important. And the parents are part of that process. But I don't know, it's just dignifying their experience. And maybe it's helped because I'm younger, even though obviously I'm older than them. But you know, and this is not me saying this is what people have said to me, is like, you look so young, you know. People like mistake me for the intern very often. It used to like really piss me off. But now I'm just like, I don't, whatever. If you want to think I'm 12, that's fine. But, you know, it's allowed me to kind of be in these spaces where people, you know, I'm young, they're young. Maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, you know, going back to my ongoing compliment comparing to Joan Didion, she has this great quote that so many of us know, where she talks about how being physically small is a, you know, basically an advantage to her as a reporter. And her whole thing, which is not what you're saying here, is that she likes her smallness because it's something like her presence always runs counter to everybody's interest, but they don't know it. You're not exactly trying to do that when you're you know, profiling these people. Maybe with the exception of the only person I read about that you wrote about that I was like, she does not like this person, was LeVar Ball. But you're not alone there, so you're not exactly a pioneer on that.
Well, yeah. No, it's just, it's funny because like when I walk into these locker rooms, everyone's just looking at me like, what are you doing here? You know, like I think they're just like genuinely like, who are you? Like, who is this little girl? And like, I'm telling you, like, they're like, who is, like, are you somebody's little sister? And I like, I went through a stretch of time where I like casually held up my press pass, like just not, I wasn't like that, but I would hold it there because I'm like, no, I'm legit. Like, I'm an adult, you know, but I think like, I'm always underestimated because of my size, but I also think, you know, it's really allowed me to get in places and spaces as a reporter, because they don't think I'm supposed to be there, or they don't think, like in Lithuania, they didn't think that I was a legit journalist. So, you know, I snuck in the gym and it was no problem because I was this tiny girl. So, you know, on the one hand, I don't like it, but I make it work, you know.
On the other hand, not speaking necessarily about your stature or anything like that, but just speaking about you and your experience and what you're going to be drawn to in a story, like you were saying about Gianna, and I think this also comes through in the Monet Davis piece. You know, you played basketball and you love basketball, and you come to these stories through your own passion. And even in a story like the LaMelo one, like obviously his career and your basketball career are a little bit different, but it's there in that story very much so, maybe even in some ways more so, with the LaMelo stories. And so I that comes through on the page, but I'm also just thinking about how it must come through in the conversations that you're having with the people you're interviewing. Like, they know you're legit in that sense.
Well, yeah, it really like, it colors my reporting and what I ask and what I choose to write about, but it definitely comes through in like the reporting and talking to them. In Lithuania, I felt like I was at a roadblock after week one. I felt like, you know, because I didn't have a translator and I needed to get to the teammates, and these guys would just like stare at me every day, like, why are you in our practice? You know, because I would just sit there every day, and I was like, okay, I just have to go up to one of them and say like, do you speak English? And befriend him, and then like get him to translate to other people. And I found one, but the interview was just like really awkward. You know, we were just each other's languages. There was just so many awkward pauses. And then I was like, what can I do to like make this situation better? And so I grabbed a ball, and I just started like doing dribbling drills on the like side. And I was like, maybe if they see me dribble, maybe they'll think I'm legit and be like, oh, she plays basketball. Like, oh, she knows what she's talking about. And on the one hand, I was like, this is annoying that you have to do this. But on the other hand, I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. I've always wanted to play overseas. Like, oh my God, I'm playing on an overseas court, you know? And so I just forgot about why I was doing it. And then I just started having all this fun doing all these dribbling drills. And I ended up putting myself through like a full workout. and then after the practice, one of the guys came up to me and he was like, you're really good. And I was like, I used to play, you know, and it was like, yes, it worked. Like, they know I'm legit. And so he introduced me to like one of the other guys. And then that's how I got in, which is like showing them that I can dribble. So
Totally. That like that little scene you just described, I can't help but it reminds me of that viral video we all saw last fall of Obama making that shot
yeah.
and going, "That's what I do," on the campaign trail. That was like your "That's what I do" moment, but you're doing these dribbling drills, which is awesome. Um,
Right.
but well, so a couple of things about those Lamello pieces, the Lithuania one in particular. Um, so first of all, those pieces, at least of what I've read of yours, that's where the one exception where you use the first person. And I, of course, the English major English teacher part of me, I have my theories as to why you and maybe your editors decided to go that way. Um, and then also we have this kind of ongoing thread throughout the piece where you're kind of pissed off that you don't see the players doing any drills or doing sprints. And I because they're just kind of being maybe a little lazy about their craft, right? And I can't of course help but think about you, the writer, you, the very patient, very long game endurance athlete of a journalist, saying fundamentals, people. um,
Exactly.
yeah, but will you maybe say a little bit about the first person, about using I in the Lamello pieces?
Yeah, I had no idea how to do that. I didn't want to do that, but my editor was like, you need to do that, Christina Tapper. And so it was her idea. And I was really uncomfortable with it at first because I've never done it before. Like you, I kind of find first person like extremely nauseating and like arrogant and you know, I hate first lines of a story was like, I called blah, blah, blah. We're in the elevator, we're eating a salad. Like, it's not about you.
Mm,
But Christina was absolutely right in this situation because it was different. It wasn't to be like, oh, I was in Lithuania. It was like, I'm seeing something that other people aren't seeing. Like everyone saw the games broadcasted on Facebook Live, but they had no idea the backstory of how this dad took over the sham of the league and turned it into this really ridiculous like JV bonanza, And so I think like it worked because it was like I was observing things that people didn't know. I saw that they were practicing like a JV squad. I saw that there was no sprints. So we try not to make it like too self-conscious, like too overwhelming that it was like everywhere, but it was just noticing certain moments. And so even though she was not my editor for the second piece when I went to Australia, it just worked. Like I just felt like I had to do it to explain certain things. So like, for example, at the end of the Australia story, when he tells me I'm a grown ass man, it doesn't make sense unless you have what I asked him and how that interaction came to be, because he was making fun of me for being so tiny.
right.
And then that's when the natural banter got him saying like he's this grown person, which again, crux of the piece, right? Child living an adult life. So I had to put the I in them. But if you look at the rest of my work, it's never there. Like I'm so uncomfortable. I'm so uncomfortable with it.
Yeah. I mean, so I've never really written well, maybe I have like one time in college, but I'm not personally a journalist, and my education is actually in memoir and creative nonfiction. So I love to write about myself. But it's when I'm writing about myself, as opposed to me profiling you and talking about what I ordered for lunch or something.
Right.
Although there's one of the for some reason I remember in the Lamello piece, there's this nice little scene where the two of you have McFlurries. And he's commenting on, I think this was the Australia one, commenting on how the Australian McFlurry has more Oreos in it than the American one, which makes me want to go get a, yeah. But when I was thinking about it as I was rereading the the Lithuania LaMelo piece, and I was thinking about how you're putting yourself right there, and I think it kind of helps. It does create this kind of fun like alignment or parallel between you and LaMelo, which stood out to me because even though I know, it did seem like the two of you developed a decent enough relationship. I mean, it was strong enough that you ended up writing a second piece about him. But what was interesting to me in that piece, I made a joke earlier about LeVar, but at one point the family did cut off your access, didn't they? Yeah, while you were there. And it you incorporate even that into the piece, which isn't something everybody would do. But then also, you're uh, you're including yourself, and it feels like the trust is being built with you and LaMelo and you and the reader, but not you and LeVar necessarily. But it's so prominent because we see you there. And there's also just something to be said about the isolation based on the language barrier there, that I think having like us actually having to really wrap our minds around you being there is really helpful to see.
Well, yeah, and I think it's kind of like similar to what we were just saying with the Gigi being a footnote in Kobe's story. LaMelo was like, at that point when I went to Lithuania, he was a footnote in LeVar's story.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it was very important to like center LaMelo. But then when I went, I realized you cannot talk about LaMelo without LeVar, because everything LaMelo did then was like he had no agency. Like his dad made all his choices for him. So it was like trying to give LaMelo agency, but he wasn't quite in a position yet to talk about that. And that's why I went back to Australia to do the second story, is because his dad was not there all the time. And so I was able to like get LaMelo to talk about what it is like to be his own man. And the more he was telling me about how like exploited he was, the more I realized like this is just an angle of it that people haven't discussed. It's always like trying to center LeVar to get the sound bite, but I find LaMelo like so much more interesting than LeVar.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets back at that idea of someone being so much more than
Yeah.
the initial thing we think about. And I'm pretty sure you said this in the long form podcast. You recently profiled Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers, and I think he was surprised you didn't ask him what it's like to play with Aaron Rodgers. And you're like, I don't care. Like, like that's not what I'm writing about. Like, I'm writing about you as a human being who happens to play football in your life, and but I think that goes right back to, not only is the piece more interesting when you don't focus on what everybody already knows about LeVar or what it's like to play with Aaron Rodgers, but it just helps that relationship so much, and which frankly helps the piece.
You have to know that they are so over media. They are so over. They've been asked anything and everything. They are so over it. And so they have a very, very tight leash as far as like a snap judgment of you in the first minute. Mm-hmm. And so if you come with a question about Aaron Rodgers, he's just like, okay, like my name is Davante, like I think so. It's just, you got to do the work. You got to do your research. Like, I know, like, it makes me scared to think of like going to an interview without doing research. And I know it sounds crazy, but this isn't something you just show up to and shoot the shit. This is like a very deep thing that you're prepared for. You want it to be organic and natural, but like have to do the work. Like, this isn't just like, let's be friends with LaMelo and get McFlurries and have fun. This is like, I need to read everything that's ever been done on this subject. And I need to figure out how I can differentiate myself, because long form, you're fighting for people's memory and attention. And so it's like, what, you can't do the same recycled stuff. Like, you have to bring something new every time.
Yeah. Well, as someone who has recently been immersed in your work and career, I can say I've just been working my butt off for this moment right now. But, getting, I have all my printouts. Look at all my printouts.
Lee,
I
I
know. Listen, I'm stuck in my house. What do you want me to do?
my heart is fluttering.
Uh, um, but I in a minute we'll get to. I want to bring in some questions from some of our fine viewers, fine audience members. But I first want to just say though that so I chose the GG piece, the initial one, the Legacy of Mambasita, as the one piece this past semester, this fall semester, that we read in my class about Kobe, but obviously I was, taking a slightly different angle with it. And the reason I chose that was because, of course, there was good reporting done, about Kobe after that tragedy last year. I think of Ramona Shelburne in particular did some great work on that, and continues to. But I did really appreciate just how humane and how different and expansive your angle was. And I think what your piece accomplished in a very subtle way that I don't even know if it was intentional was in writing about Gianna. um, you wrote about Kobe in perhaps the best way one could. And I feel like what we've learned about him, um, which is sometimes, I'll say, reduced to this concept of hashtag girl dad, what we've learned about him is how important parenting was to him, and also mentoring young athletes, particularly young women basketball players. And what a lot of stories ignored completely after Kobe died, and others tried to grapple with, not always successfully, was the fact that he had gone through, he was an accused sexual, he was accused of sexual assault, and that was a very difficult thing to kind of reckon with when he died. And I think, of course, your piece doesn't address that at all, and it doesn't need to. But what we see here is how he transformed and how he grew and how he came beyond that. And we see in Gigi and her team kind of, Kobe's development as a human being over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely, of course, like very conscious of that, but I always thought like if I'm writing about Gigi, even though yes, there's things about Kobe that's totally revealed in there, like you said, it develops his character too. It really was her story, and I just thought it's so. Why should this girl have to answer for her
Yep.
father's transgressions? And so I thought it would be better to just center her than do a 2-sentence insertion that does nothing. Like I think it's like we don't know how to. I mean, I think that we're still learning how to write about these things, and there's people far smarter than me that do it in such incredible ways. And so it's like, I think there were people that did that very well, but it just didn't work in my story. And I also just I just think it's unfair for her to even be like tied to that. And I think like the complexity of human beings is that we will never know how Kobe, the void between what happened and how he becomes a girl dad, that is lost to time, space, and memory. And that sucks because I would have loved to know how he got from there to here. But you can acknowledge that whatever happened and what he did it doesn't mean that this other side of him wasn't true also. Like, I think there's many truths. And so I wanted to show this other side, that it wasn't just Gigi. It's like, what kind of like global icon gives nicknames to other players that has there's no incentive for him to do that. Like, there's no reason for him to do that. but he legit cared. And so I just think there's just a lot. It's hard, it's complex, but I just wanted to like center the girls for once. They're like never, I don't know if it's because I played, I don't know if it's because I know it, but like we're just never centered in anyone's narrative. We're just always afterthoughts.
Right. Right. Um, yeah. And I thought about that piece a lot after I read it, and I was still thinking about it months later when it was time to make a syllabus. And it was like, of course, this is the piece we need to read and talk about. Um, and talk about what you, as you're saying, chose not to center and chose not to include, as well as why center who we are centering here. um One question we got from Eric, who is watching on YouTube, um is, it makes me think about maybe the more recent piece you did on the Mambas, the team. Um, Eric asks, what kind of obstacles has COVID given you from a reporting perspective, informing these relationships? So I can't help but think that first, never mind the obvious other obstacles of writing about something so difficult. The first time around, you were able to go talk to people in person, presumably. And then this time around, in the second piece about Gianna, um, you speak with Zach Randolph, who's a fellow former NBA player and coach for the league. You speak with Sabrina Ionescu of the WNBA, who Kobe mentored. So how did COVID mess all that up?
Oh, COVID. Yeah, it's COVID's been hard. I think after March of last year, everything. Tyler Skaggs was actually the only interview I did in person after March, and that was like a very scary. Like, do I want to risk Rona for this story? We were masked up, obviously, but I was like terrified. But yeah, it's been hard in the sense of that intimacy that you're trying to build with somebody. It's a very in-person thing, but I've been pleasantly surprised, you guys. I'm not just trying to be Pollyanna. Like, this time period blows. We all know it. Like, we were just talking before we got on here, like, you randomly wake up, you're like, why am I sad? And you're like, oh, it's the pandemic where 500,000 are dead. Like, that's why you're sad. But I've been pleasantly surprised to where there's almost a really eerie intimacy that you gain over the phone in the first 10, 15 minutes because you're both waking up feeling similarly. And the question, how are you, has totally gone on different, significance now. And I find that like, it's a real way to just relate. And I don't know, it starts off the interview with the shared intimacy of like joking, like, I say I'm okay, but I feel like trash. Or like, I don't know about you, but like, man, I'm so tired of forgetting to go outside and take a walk, and it immediately bonds you. And I think you should really just use this to your advantage. Like, personally, I have found that phone calls work better than Zoom over COVID because there's something about like having to show your face. And I know we all know what that's like, where you have to be presentable. Like, how do I look? Like, how's my hair? Like, what do you know? But like, when you're doing a phone call, you don't have to like worry about that. You can just talk. And I have found that they open up so much more when they're just on the phone and they can just talk and multitask. And so that's been working for me. And then lastly, I'll say that you have an advantage in the sense of you can straight up blame COVID and say, I wish I was there in person with you to observe blah, 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 but I'm not. So can you paint the scene for me? And so it's like this automatic, like, I know this is so weird, but can you get really nerdy and granular? Like, what did, the scene of Devonte in his like living room, like, obviously I wasn't there. So I made him describe exactly how tall the contraption was that his daughter was bouncing in, And so I think COVID, it's like, okay, does this time period like absolutely suck in every way? Yes, it does. But like, writers write, and like you have to find a way to make it work. And so it's not always going to be like this, but when it is like this, you have to just say like, these are the circumstances. I'm going to try my best. It's not ideal. This is really tough. But you still have the gift of like writing a story, which so many people don't have. So just kind of lean into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Here in Philadelphia, they like to say, trust the process.
Nice.
Hey, I'm here.
That was good. That was
A question from Brett, Brett being a beloved former student, current advisee. Um, he asks, did you have any struggles when interviewing big personalities? And did you feel like you had to walk on eggshells in certain scenarios? And how did you navigate those situations?
I mean, I'm always nervous before every interview. Like I'm always nervous. It's not because they're like famous people. Like I think there is a bit of that at first. You're just like, oh my God, that's so and so. But I think I'm just always nervous because I care about it so much. And I think like if I'm not nervous, then like that's a problem. That means I don't care.
Yeah.
Which has never happened in the history of life. I just know that like I'm nervous and that's good because it's going to push me to prepare. And, you know, I need to be better at like managing the anxiety. But I think like you don't walk on eggshells if you are fully engaged in the conversation, then you're not thinking about fucking up. Like if you like I think earlier in my career, I wasn't locked in like that. I was always, is this question stupid? Oh my God, is he why is he looking at me like that? Was this dumb? Am I dumb? Like, why is this? And you just start like getting in your head. And when you're in your head, you're not present. When you're not present, you're not listening to them. When you're not listening to them, you're not understanding them. And I think if you can just get out of your head, take a vacation from your brain during the interview and just focus and engage, you find that you don't walk on eggshells because you're so interested and you're just so like, you just get this reporter's high, you could just get lost in the conversation. And so you just remind yourself before every interview to help. I'm here to learn about another person. I'm here to listen. I'm here. I'm just going to learn something. We're just going to have a conversation. I'm just going to learn. I'm going to sit next to a human being. And that calms me down.
Yeah. 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 And it also, I mean, so much of what you're saying is, of course, right on for the, reporting and writing process. And then it also just like, applies to the sports side of things too. I think about, something that comes up in running is, right before a race, people get very nervous, especially with something like a marathon, where it's just like, you just have to remind yourself how much training you've done, or, remind yourself of how much has already been done to get you to that moment. So I think with an interview, it's a similar thing, this like the hay is in the barn kind of thing. And I'm sure, I don't play basketball or football, but it's the same idea. Like, before any big moment, right? You just have to kind of trust the process.
Your body knows what to do. Like that's the thing. There's muscle memory. You know what to do. And like here's the thing. When you're 19, you don't know what to do. That's real. But if you do this every day from 19 to 20 to 21 to 22, you have muscle memory and you get that confidence. Like the first day at the OC register, I called my mom. I was like, I don't think that I can do this, Mom. I am not cut out for this. I just think I can't do this. And she's like, it's your first day of your first real adult job. But muscle memory is built up, right? How do you become a great free throw shooter? You do it every day. Nobody's good on the first day. And so it's like this confidence that we're talking about and the muscle memory, it comes from years of experience. So if you're a student right now and you're like, why am I not confident? Why don't I know what I'm doing? It's because you're a college student and that's fine. You're where you're supposed to be is basically what I'm saying. It takes time. And I'm still learning and not confident in certain ways. And I'm still figuring it out. You're never going to wake up and be like, oh, I'm so good at this. I got this. It's always going to be like this. It's always, you just get hopefully a little bit better at it each day.
Yeah. Got to get those reps. What can you tell us about the Giannis book?
And I can tell you that I'm thankful for WhatsApp because all the Greeks are on WhatsApp. No, but yes, thank God for WhatsApp. Um, I can tell you that all the themes that we're talking about humanizing and, trying to get to the soul of a story is really what has, colored the book. It's we go from the beginning, from the early days, and I think for me the challenge is kind of like, well, half the book is like early stages in life, because so much happened in childhood. And so I think what you're going to see is a more vulnerable Giannis. If anyone read my story on him and his brothers, it showed a different side of him. Everyone was obviously talks about his athleticism and his, he's the Greek freak, but I feel like they really miss his mind. He's a very smart, intellectual person that is just so beyond caring. He is so big-hearted, and being big-hearted comes from pain. And this book really gets into those experiences that made him who he is. So it's, I'm excited about it. Of course, I'm nervous about it. It's my first book. Like I said, the first time you report, you don't know what you're doing. The first time you write a book, you don't exactly know what you're doing. But a year into the process now, I know so much more than I knew then.
Yeah, so like you said, this book kind of came out of you profiled Giannis's youngest brother Alex for Bleacher Report, a story people should go and read on its own. And that, so was it the process of reporting that story and establishing relationships with the family then that led to you saying, there's more to say. I've got to do this bigger project.
Yeah, it was such a lesson in like just being open, because I went there and I thought I was going to profile Alex, the youngest one. And then Giannis is like in the kitchen and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, like I didn't even know he was going to be here,
Mhm.
and the more I observed and watched them interact, watched how like protective Giannis was of him. He like called him while they were in the same house just to like check on the youngest brother. And so I was like, he's one story below you, like he's good, but that's how close they are. And so I just observed their relationship for that day and I was like, there's just so much more here. And I think the story ended up telling you as much about Giannis as it did Alex. Like it was a profile of Alex, but it was really a profile of the more vulnerable sides of Giannis. And I had been trying and failing, I should note, to write a book proposal for the last 5 years. And it's really complicated because you need a couple things to go right. You need the idea has to be good, but not just good, like interesting. It has to be sellable. And then you have to have a literary agent that believes in you and believes in the idea. So there's like all these factors. And I would meet with literary agents who didn't like the other ideas that I had, or they said they were really good ideas, they're just not going to sell. Or they would say, I like you, but I think you're too young. Or like, you're on the rise, but you're not quite there. Like, call me in a couple years. Or like, it was just never right. And then in January of that year, 2019, that I wrote the Giannis story, I was introduced to a literary agent and I really liked him. He was just so kind, Anthony Matero of CAA, and he just took me seriously. Like on the first meeting, he was just like, I think you have a lot of potential. I'm happy to like talk shop if you want to like send me ideas, like open door. So we did that for the next like 3-4 months, 5 months. And the stories I sent just weren't quite right, the ideas I had. But then when the Giannis thing came out, I sent it to him and I was like, thoughts? And he was like, love a good thoughts email. And he was like, this is the one. And so I ended up actually writing a lot of that proposal while I was in Australia. It takes a really long time to write a proposal. And so we both thought that this was not only a really human story, it would like highlight the things that I'm interested in as a person, as a journalist, but like obviously Giannis is a really popular figure globally, it would finally, serve that sort of like, oh, this is an actual sellable book.
Yeah. Yeah. And just in hearing, I have not read any of your draft of the project yet, but I will read it when it is out. But so much of what you're saying, I mean, just connects back to things we've been talking about. It's the long game of establishing the trust in these relationships. It's, again, like you were writing about Giannis's little brother. So it wasn't just Alex's trust, it was Giannis's trust and the whole family's trust. And you were there. Um, you wrote about some tough stuff, their father died while you were reporting this piece, right? And so you were, there as a writer establishing this relationship through so much that I can very much see how it would grow into something like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I was, interviewing Giannis's mom, and she doesn't give interviews, like she just doesn't talk to people. And it was like for the first like 40 minutes, just like very, and also like, a little difficult language wise, and so I think, but then like there was a moment after the first 40 minutes where she like handed me an Altoid, and I was like, like I think we're, like
You're
she,
in.
yeah, she doesn't hate me, so I think like because it's like, who is this annoying girl asking me all these questions? I'm not saying she thought that, but it's like you don't know how you come across. And so I was like, oh my God. And so I actually ended up talking to Giannis because she was like, let's go talk to him. And she was the one that steered me to him. So it was getting the mom's trust, which
Sure.
me to all of them. So I also think just like book writing, I want to write many books. Like I said, I want to be like Jeff Pearlman, but I was like trying to force it for the 4 years before that. It was like, what book can I do? Like, and it happened by just doing the work. It just naturally came out of a story instead of like trying to find the topic.
Right. Yeah. And I'm seeing there's a question from my old pal Jack, and it kind of gets, I think, what you're saying gets at this, at least in part, which is what are some of the strategies you use with interview subjects who are not forthcoming with their answers? I mean, a big part of it for you is just, you're just going to hang around. You're just there, in a not always, sometimes in a productively passive way, I'm just here, I'm just listening, I'm just observing, I'm just genuinely curious. But are there other strategies you would add?
Yeah, I think it's like, it's how you phrase the question. And it's also just like bringing empathy to the situation. Like empathy is really just the greatest trait you can have, which is like, I know this is really hard for you to talk about, but I was just wondering if you feel comfortable opening up about blah, blah, blah. Like, I think, especially with younger writers, like we don't have a lot of time in these interviews sometimes. So it's like, you got to get to it somehow. And so sometimes you just have to say what you want, and say it in a way that is not invasive, but just being very truthful about what you're hoping to talk about. And it's not like, tell me about blah, blah, blah. It's like, do you feel comfortable sharing blah, blah, blah? Like there's just a completely different tone. So for example, like I was talking with Alex, Giannis's youngest brother, for about like 3 hours before I realized like we really kind of need to talk about their dad. And so I said, all this time we've been talking about Giannis's impact on you and the NASA's impact on you, their other brother. And, I see that you are a blend of your brothers. And I also see that you want to be your own man, but I'd be remiss to not ask about your dad's influence. And I know that that's just probably so difficult and so raw right now, but is this something you want to talk about? Because I feel like it would be really helpful in understanding how you are becoming the man you want to be by understanding the man that your dad was teaching you how to be. Which again, it's like, it's saying what I clearly want, which is I want to talk about this, but it's having that caveat, like, I know you may not want to. So here, I'm just posing it to you. Do you want to talk about that? Here's why I want to. Here's why I think it's important. There is obviously a 50-50 chance that he can be like, no.
Yeah.
And you have to be like, okay.
Yeah.
No problem. You can't be like, no, but I actually need to know.
Right. Well, why not? Yeah.
Yeah, like that's not like, if they say no, they say no.
Right. It's the old you got to shoot your shot, right? That's what they say.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. Well, we're just about at we're actually 2 minutes past the time I said we would go, but that's okay, I think. And I know we've been putting the pre-order link to the Giannis book in our YouTube chat, so everybody should go. Even if you're not going to pre-order it, guys, go to the page, because you can read the description, and it's a very lovely description, and it'll make you think. And I do want to give a quick shout out. I've glanced at the YouTube chat a few times, and some pals are in there. Actually, Jack, whose question we just discussed. Jack is he's a Penn basketball alum who played in Europe for a bit, and I think he's 6 foot a lot, and I like to get my picture taken next to him because it looks funny. But we're friends from probably a decade ago or more. So I'm glad Jack is here. Some Sports Narratives alums are out there. Olivia and Jill and Charlie, who is now working social media for the San Antonio Spurs, is watching. So I guess Pop let him take a lunch break. And a pal of mine, Tanashi, who is in South Africa, actually a prospective student who's been working with us, who's a big Lakers fan. He's watching as well, and some other Writers House friends. So I'm so glad everybody's, taking a nice long lunch break today. I guess for Tanashi in South Africa, it's like a dinner break or something. But Mirin, I'm so grateful for you doing this today.
That was so fun. Thank you for having me. And it's so encouraging to see people love journalism and storytelling. So I'm so grateful you guys showed up. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm grateful too. And one day in the future, when there is a book we can hold in our hands, we'll get you to Philly, we'll get you to the Writers House, we'll get you down to the Palestra to shoot get some shots up. And it'll be so much fun. One last little thing I'm wondering, are there any particular storylines relating to the Super Bowl that you are excited about? Not to spring that on you, but maybe to spring it on you a little bit.
To be honest, I'm so in book hell right now that I was like, oh my God, the Super Bowl. Jamie, I am just, when I wake up, it's Giannis. When it's Giannis, I haven't even begun to, I'm sorry, I can't.
Don't be sorry. It's okay.
I failed on the final question.
You didn't fail. You can just enjoy like a normal person. Order yourself a pizza on Sunday. Just enjoy it. And I mentioned this to you before we started, but I don't know how subtle my pro. Does everyone see who's guiding me through this? We've got Gronk on a Frisbee up here too.
Oh my God.
But I'm as unapologetic and relentless as I was even before all of these various changes with regard to Tom Brady. But but
my bosses will be happy.
Yes. Anyway, Mirin, I'm so grateful to you for doing this. I'm so grateful also to everybody at the Writers House who helped us out with this today. Also to Maury Povich and Connie Chung who sponsored this event, and Maury's dad, Shirley Povich, was the very well-known sports columnist in Washington, D.C. So I love the sports journalism connection to this. And Mirin, we will all be reading the Giannis book in August. and we look forward to doing so. And we look forward to having you at the Writers' House at some point.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. Pandemic's gonna end. But thanks again.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.